morning tonight, everyone. So my name's Mel. I'm the Senior Grants Development Officer here at Council, and this is Marie. Marie is the Grants Analyst here at Council, so we make up the Grants team. Today we're going to go through a few things in terms of community grants and just our overall grants program. So hopefully it won't go too long, and then at the end we'll go through all your questions. So an overview of today's session, we're going to go through the grants program, the program principles, community grants explained more in detail because we have a community grant round open at the moment, the assessments and how your grant applications get assessed, the timelines and timeframes of grants, tips for grant writers, where to get help, and then questions. So this is what we'll go through. And then if I haven't covered anything off, please let me know at the end and we'll go through it. Excellent. So Wyndham's grant program, we have a variety of grant categories. Each has its own eligibility criteria and its own set of guidelines, I suppose, which are all outlined in an information booklet. In your little packs, you have an information booklet on all our categories. The grants team recommend you read those information booklets because they set out everything to do with the grant criteria. And because each category is different, even though you've applied for one grant before, doesn't necessarily mean it will be the same for a different category. So all our booklets are in your packs and they can be found on this website here, which are on the notes. Our grant program, so we have community grants, which is up to $10,000 of matched funding for groups to apply for. I'll go through match funding in a little bit more detail later on. We offer 2 rounds of community grants per year, one round in May, so we have a round open at the moment, as I was saying, which closes on the 31st of May, and then another round will open in October. It closes on the last day of October, but we'll open it about 2 months before that, so you've got a lot of time to apply. We then have Wyndham Responsive Grants, which is up to $1,000 for groups to apply for. Wyndham Responsive Grants also cover travel for individuals. So anyone under the age of 21 that's representing Wyndham at an event of high standing can apply for money to cover their travel costs, their accommodation costs, if they're representing Wyndham at a national swimming competition or something like that. So responsive grants can be competitive because they cover off a range of things, but they are designed for quick, fast money. So it is a lot quicker to apply for a responsive grant than a community grant because it's less money. So they're open all year round on a monthly basis. We open them on the 1st of every month and they close on the last day of every month. And that's an ongoing cycle for 12 months. The timelines around responsive grants are quick, so we assess them basically the following month. So if responsive grants closed on the last day of the month, we would then assess them the first 2 weeks in the next month, and basically by the 3rd week in the next month you would know if you're successful or unsuccessful. So they're a great one to apply for if you've got a project running and you've realised you need $1,000 to assist it. It's a great category to apply for. Then we have Identified Needs Grants. That's a much bigger category. It's up to $150,000 for groups to apply for. Being such a big amount of money also comes with a big amount of accountability and time frames. So we only offer that once a year and we open that in around October and it closes in February. So you've got a nice long time frame to apply. However, the decision making process is long because it's so much money. So you won't actually know if you're successful or unsuccessful until around May, June. And then the Identified Needs Grants goes through the council budget process. So even then, when you find out if you're successful or unsuccessful, it still has been included in the draft budget. So it's still technically a draft. You then find out if you're 100% successful from the 1st of July. So it's a very long process. So you have to plan ahead for that one. So what can you get funding for? So you can get funding for projects that encourage participation of community groups in conducting community activities that help council achieve its strategic objectives and goals. Again, I'll go through council's plans a little bit later on into detail and how your projects can align with those goals. Projects that promote strong community networks and increase local identity. Projects that raise cultural awareness. Projects that are inclusive of all people in the Wyndham community. And and projects that develop community leaders. So they're quite broad. Any sort of project can fit into that criteria, as long as you stick to that sort of stuff. So grants don't cover capital works, buildings, landscaping works, that sort of stuff. So what you can't get money for? Events that promote religious or political views targeted at only your religion, so it has to be inclusive of everyone. Equipment alone, so this is a big one. You can't just apply for equipment. You can't just apply for, say, a mower to mow your turf wicket at your sports ground. It has to be a part of the broader project. So you can apply for equipment as long as it's a part of your project. So for example, if you're running a healthy cooking program, teaching kids how to cook healthy and how to eat healthy to decrease obesity, you could apply for pots and pans and food and all that sort of stuff because it's a part of the project. But you couldn't just apply for something operational that you need on a daily basis. As I was saying, capital works, so building and landscaping, excursions and events only targeted at your organisation, so you couldn't apply to go on a sporting camp just with your group, because then it's not really inclusive of everyone. Operational expenses, so if it's your operations of your group to, say, a sporting club, to run football competitions every weekend, then you couldn't apply for money to pay for your coaches and that sort of stuff, because that's what you're there to do. However, if you were going to put on a free clinic, hello, that's Catering. If you were going to put on a free clinic for kids with disabilities to teach them skills about how to kick a football, that would be fine because it's outside of your normal operations. Projects that give a commercial advantage to a specific business. Programs or activities that have already happened. So you can't apply for money to pay for an event that's already happened. It has to be a project that's going to happen in the future. Projects that fall within the responsibility of another level of government. So now that's a little bit of a grey area. We take this one on a case-by-case basis, so it's best to chat to us if you're not really sure about this. But basically this means the Department of Education, for example, is around to fund school projects and things like that. So at a local level, we probably wouldn't fund a project that's the responsibility of the Department of Education because they're a state body. So it's a little bit of a tricky one. It's definitely a grey area, and we're happy to chat to you about your project on a case-by-case basis. Excellent. Cool. So that's what you can't get money for. So applying for a community grant, these are the steps that you need to take. So step one, you have to read through the information booklet. It'll give you a clearer idea of how the whole process works, and they're in your packs. So have a flick through the information booklet. Step two, contact us to discuss your idea. So it's really important that you have a chat to us about what project you're going to run, because we don't want you to fill out an application form and spend a heap of time, filling out an application if the idea doesn't really fit in line with our goals or strategic plans. So we can tell you straight off, if your project looks like it would be a strong project for funding and that sort of stuff. So we're more than happy in the grants team to chat to you about your ideas, what you want money for, and guide you in the right direction. Step three, and I'll go into this a little bit later as well, register online on our grants website. So all of our grants are done online, and we're happy to provide assistance if people have issues logging online and using the internet. We can refer you guys onto community centres and go out there and help you. But you have to create a login name. What we do suggest when you create a login name, that you create it as your organisation. So a lot of people create their login name as their personal email address and then their password. Then they go in and create their application. However, when that person leaves the organisation, the grant application and the quittal, everything goes with that person because it's attached to their login name. So if you've got an organisational login name like admin@wyndham.com.au, you would use that. So if you were to leave the organisation, anyone could log in as admin and check out your grant applications and your acquittals and that sort of thing. Step four, you need to compile all your supporting documentation to go with your application. Letters of support, certificate of incorporation, it's definitely a good idea to look at this sort of stuff before you even start your grant application, because you do have to attach your certificate of incorporation, public liability, financial statements to your grant application. What a lot of groups do is they do their application, then they go to attach their files and they don't have them, and they've got to chase them up, and by the time they get them, the round's closed and they've missed out. So make sure you're aware of that sort of stuff. It's really important. If you're not incorporated, you're not eligible. So, and I'll go through auspicing and all that sort of stuff in a minute as well. Step 5, you have to make sure you complete all the questions on your application. The application won't let you submit if you haven't completed all the questions. So it's important that you complete them all and you list the budget. And then step 6, submit your application by 5 p.m. Friday, 31st of May. So it's about 2 weeks away. Being on an online system, if you miss that closing date, we cannot accept your application. The system is programmed to proper time, so you've got to be careful with your clocks as well, because sometimes your clock might be out and then you might think it's 5:02 but it's 2:02 or something. So try and get it in at least an hour before the closing date, just to save yourself that hassle. Excellent. Okay, matched funding. So with community grants, which is the grant round that's open at the moment, you have to match the funding that you ask for. So if you ask for $10,000 of funding, which is the full amount, you have to match it with $10,000. Now that doesn't need to be cash, so don't be scared. It can be in-kind labour, so you can cost your volunteers out. You could cost your volunteers out at $20 an hour. So if you've got a volunteer working on the project 5 hours a week, every week, you can cost that out at $20 an hour, and there's your match funding. You can use donations, so any sort of equipment that you're donating to the project. You could, if you're running a healthy cooking program and you're bringing, all your old pots and things, you can cost them out, and then that's match funding. If someone's donating a jumping castle to your program, you can cost that jumping castle out at what you would hire it for. And anyone that's got a qualification, so if someone in your organisation has a qualification in registered training and they're taking your course for free, you could cost them out at what they would cost themselves out. So that could be $1,000 a session or something. So you can get your match funding up pretty easily when you start to think about it, so don't be too scared. And it can also be money given from another source, so the Multicultural Affairs Commission or state sporting associations. There's many different funding bodies out there. So if you get funding from another body, that's definitely match funding. Food and catering is a big one that we get asked questions about, so we've added it to our presentation. You have to be careful with food and catering. So we suggest that you only ask for 10% of your entire project budget of food and catering. So if you ask for $10,000 of funding, then you could only really ask for $1,000 of catering. So try and keep your catering to a minimal cost, and where you can, try and make it yourself or get volunteers to make the sandwiches and that sort of stuff. So you buy the ingredients, it's a little bit cheaper, makes it a little bit easier. So because in terms of catering, we want that to be at a lower cost, because ultimately the project needs to be offering community benefit, and by spending a heap of money on catering, it's not really offering that community involvement. Be careful with it as well, because it can't be added to your match funding. So keep your match funding to donations, volunteer labour, that sort of stuff. Cool. Evidence is a big thing with your application. So the panel really look for support for your project. So if your project has a lot of support, it'll rank pretty highly with the panel. So things like newspaper articles, surveys. So you may have run a project previously and you've taken surveys off the kids, and the kids have said, we want to see more youth programs in the community. You could get those survey results, and that could act as a basis of research for your current program that you're asking for money for. So then it shows that there's a need in the community for the program that you want to run. Statistics, any sort of statistics, you can use census data, you can get any sort of data from council if you want to. We have a range of departments here at council that you can get statistics from, including healthy communities, childhood obesity rates, all that sort of stuff. So if you're running a community project, specifically about something, we can definitely help you find some statistics on Wyndham specifically and why you need to run that program. Excellent. So if you've put in an application by the 31st of May, the way we assess it, so keep this in the back of your mind when you're filling out your application. Your application will have categories above each page, and I'm going to show you the form in a moment. Phase 1, phase 1 is eligibility. So basically, to be eligible, you get 40 points straight away for being eligible. And to be eligible, you just have to tick the boxes I talked about before. So not capital works, not religious political use. That list of no's, as long as you're none of that, you'll be eligible, and that you have matched funding. So as long as you tick all those boxes, you'll be eligible and you'll get 40 points and move to the next level. The next level is compliance, where you'll get a score of 0 to 10 based on how well your application addresses Section 5. So I'll go through the sections of the application form in a moment, but Section 5 basically talks about officer recommendation and community benefit. So how well your project shows community benefit. Phase 3 is community benefit. We'll go through Section 5 in a minute. So with community benefit, you get 40 points for that, so that's a big one. There's a whole section on your application form about community benefit, so why you want to run the program, who will benefit from it, your target audience, that sort of stuff. So keep that in mind, that's a big score, that one. Officer recommendation is 10 points. Now, although it's only 10 points of scoring, it does carry a lot of weight with your application. So, for instance, if you're doing a healthy cooking class, that application will be given to the Healthy Communities team, and the Healthy Communities team will have a look at it and they'll give it a score out of 10. But if they look at it and they say, oh, we're already running this program, you know, we could run this program in conjunction with this group instead of putting them through funding. So you've got to be careful, and that's where if you talk to us about your ideas, we can follow your ideas up with these departments to make sure that they're not already running these sort of things. That's really important. The panel take the officer recommendation into consideration quite highly. So if an officer from Healthy Communities says, wow, this is a great program, we knew this group was running this, council are not running it, we're not meeting this need, we give it a 10 out of 10, the panel will say, wow, this is something that's not already happening, you know, and it will kind of move up the chain a little bit. So that's where that sort of stuff is really important, that you talk to us about your project ideas. The timeline. So this is to help with your planning of your project, because we often get people that put in their applications, they're great applications, they're successful, but then they don't get their money in time and they can't run the program. So it's really important that you know the timelines of the program. So from the closing date, it's generally about a 6 to 8 week time lapse until you'll find out if you're successful or unsuccessful. So the first thing that you get immediately once you press submit, immediately via email, you'll get a notification saying we've received your application. If you don't get that email, you haven't submitted. So just be sure of that. It's an automated system, so it'll automatically send you that email. So if you haven't got the email, go back in, log back in, and make sure that you've pressed the button and it hasn't come up that you haven't filled everything out. Then the grants team assess for eligibility. So as Councillor Gupta was saying before, we'll do the initial look at your application, make sure it ticks all those eligible boxes, make sure it has matched funding, and then we'll proceed those applications on. The ones that are ineligible will not go anywhere. So that's why it's important that you always check that eligibility criteria and that you've ticked all those boxes. Then what happens is we forward those applications to the panel and the officers. So like I was saying before, the Healthy Communities officers will get the projects on health. The recreation people will get the projects on sport. The environment people will get the environmental projects. They'll all score them out of 10 and write some comments on them. The panel will also score their applications, and then they'll all come back together and we'll have a panel meeting. So the panel is made up of 2 councillors, 4 community representatives, and the manager of social development. So the community representatives are there to basically represent the Wyndham community. It is ratepayers' money that is in the grants pool, so that's why they sit on the panel. The panel then has their panel meeting where they rank all the applications, depending on whether or not it's a competitive round. All projects might be great, but because it's so competitive, some might fall a little bit lower than others, to keep inside the budget. Then the thing that slows the process down is we do have to report to council. So ordinary council meetings only happen every 6 weeks, so we have to get into one of those meetings through this process. So depending on when the ordinary council meeting is, that the report with recommendations will go to that meeting, and then basically the day after that meeting we can let people know. So it is generally around, we can't give you an exact date until we book into an OCM. So it's normally around 8 weeks after you've submitted. But we do try and update everyone that's submitted and let them know of where we're at with the timeframes.